Colleagues, my name is Chiditsi Matsibandira. I'm the CEO and head of mission of FANAPAN. Then I will be moderating session 1 of today's conference. So let me first by acknowledging our convening partners, which are Vikela F, Food and Agriculture Organization FAO of the United Nations, SABC Education, FANAPAN, which is the Food, Agriculture, Natural Resources Policy Analysis Network, FANAPAN Node in South Africa, which is the National Agricultural Marketing Council, which is the NMC. Geographically, we know that the focus for today's discussion is South Africa. However, the hunger situation is common across the continent, as we know, and the continent here being Africa. We are pleased to also welcome participants from other parts of the continent and beyond. The 2022 World Food Day theme is Leave No One Behind. But specifically for our conference and for our delivery preparation today, the theme is Absorbing the Shocks, Climate Change and Food Security. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, more often than I'm diplomatic, but today I come to you angry. Why do I say that I'm coming to you angry? I'm not too sure who I'm angry to, but what I know is that I'm angry and I know what I'm angry about. Approximately 11% of South African population is hungry and food insecure. That is around 6.5 million people, young and old. So this situation is going to be worse in the coming months and years, and that saddens me. Malnutrition, especially undernutrition, is deepening, and that's one thing that is making me coming to you angry today. This is against the backdrop that we are producing enough food, but we are not feeding everyone who is residing in this planet. So the net worth of the collective knowledge that we have here today, I believe that it will enable us to solve this disheartening challenge. And with no further ado, I'm asking that let's move away from rhetoric to action. Let me just share with you some of the social media details. Our hashtag for today is WFD Conference 2022. I'll repeat that. Hashtag WFD Conference 2022. And then you can follow different institutions. For example, we are at FANAPAN, which is at FNRPAN, and at FAO, which is FAO, and also at SABC Education. With regard to our house rules, then please then use the chat box to introduce yourself and also to post comments and your questions. We really appreciate to get your feedback. As I said, the theme for the World Food Day is leaving no one behind. So to make sure that we gather all the contribution, please make use of the chat box. In terms of muting and unmuting and the use of cameras, please make sure that if you're not speaking, please mute yourself. And also please, if you're not speaking, switch off your videos. Without wasting more of your time, let me invite Lala Tuku, Head of Local Production at SABC, to give us the first welcoming remarks.
I hope that you can see me.
We can see you, we can hear you.
That's incredible. Thank you so much. A very warm welcome to the conference celebrating World Food Day. My name is Lala Tuku, as mentioned by Chilitsi, Head of Local Productions here at the SABC. Really, for us, we're participating in the World Food Day in response to the FAO's Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations invitation. I would like to acknowledge and thank Dr. Mercy Chikoko, FAO's South Africa's representative, for extending an invitation to us as the SABC Education to convene together with the FAO to this very, very important conference. I'd further like to extend my sincere gratitude to everyone who contributed to making today possible. FAO, FANAPAN, Vigela Earth, SABC Radio, my colleagues, and SABC News as well. So SABC Local Productions, which includes SABC Children and Education, factual, drama, entertainment, religion. We've got internal productions and industry development, offers 2 our 3 channels, SABC 1, 2, and 3, with acquisition, editorial, and delivery service. And the management of the SABC's educational and children mandate is handled by SABC Education, which has actually brought us here then today, through creative, powerful, appropriate, truthful, and interactive edutainment content. Our content really aims to shape the future of the country. Educational content with a strong entertainment component. So the World Food Day conference complements our primary areas of focus for factual and educational content. Environmental education is provided via factual and education programs. We've got programs such as Blue Gold, Living Land, and 50/50. Living Land is intended to raise awareness of the elements that influence agriculture outputs by fostering an understanding of environmental concerns such as climate change. The use of technologies that support sustainable farming methods is highlighted in Living Lands. So the show really emphasizes practical methods for expanding agriculture to create food security and lower poverty. We, as we crisscross, the width and the breadth of South Africa, we have come across really interesting agripreneurs who are changing the face of agriculture by venturing in new territories such as agritourism, strawberry farm in Belito, which is in KwaZulu-Natal, crowd farming, snail farming, abalone farms off the coast of East London. So agriculture really plays a crucial role in food security, supplying the basic products that keep millions of people fed daily. In South Africa, the industry produces a variety of products, from beef to poultry, maize, fruits, and vegetable. In an interview with Yahoo, new Spanish-American chef and activist, Mr. Jose Andres, said it best: food is health. Food is national security. Food is job creation. Food is economic growth. So the SABC Education Virtual Academy, which we call SEVA, has an e-farmers portal. E-farmers is an introductory guide to farming in South Africa, built to equip the public with critical skills in farming. Additionally, SABC Education promotes community development by establishing strategic alliances and delivering material across a variety of media such as TV, radio, digital, and outreach. So really, as the SABC, we remain committed to collaborating with our stakeholders to ensure that the public remains informed, educated, and entertained about global matters such as climate change and food security. Thank you.
You're muted, Dr.
You may be on mute.
Sorry about that. So I appreciated the brief welcome remarks from Madam Tuku. Then I went further to say that the second welcome remarks is from Dr. Messi Chikoko, for our South Africa representative. I will give you the next 5 minutes to do your welcome remarks.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. Thank you so much for this opportunity. My remarks are going to be very brief. The theme of World Food Day, as already alluded to, is leave no one behind. And this theme continues on to say better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life. And the theme for the World Food Day conference is absorbing shocks climate change, and food security. So you see that when you're talking about better environment, we have to talk about climate change, because climate change affects both, is affected or affects climate change and a better environment. So these issues cannot be talked one without the other. If we can go to the next slide. The next slide. Thank you. So I just want to talk briefly about the effects of climate change. We know that climate change has both direct and indirect effects on agriculture productivity, including changing rainfall patterns, drought, flooding, and geographical distribution of pests and diseases. And climate change affects the 4 dimensions of food security, which is availability, accessibility, utilization, and most of all, stability, through the breakdown of the food systems, affecting how food is produced, affecting distribution channels, changing purchasing powers, and price stability. We know also it affects livelihoods, the assets, and income. And of course, also impacts risk to human health. And these impacts are both long-term and short-term, resulting from more frequent and more intense extreme weather events caused by the changing temperatures and rainfall patterns. And I think the floods of KZN a few months back are still lingering in our minds and in our thoughts, and even the effects are still with us today. And people who are vulnerable and already vulnerable are most affected. Can imagine these floods washing away not just everything in a matter of minutes: your crops, your livestock, your land, your house, your assets, and livelihood. And we know that the agriculture-based livelihoods are most affected by climate change, because the water, the land, it's all dependent on how the climates are. And again, we talked about here in South Africa, they were almost day zero in some of the provinces and municipalities. Without water, you can't plant crops. Without water, you cannot raise animals. I want to go to the next slide, where we also, although we know that agriculture is affected by climate change, but also agriculture contributes to climate change. We know that agriculture, and when we talk about agriculture in FAO, we're talking about agriculture itself, crop production, animal production, forestry, fisheries, who will not only be affected by climate change, but also contribute to it through emitting greenhouse gases. We know, for example, if you are keeping cows, and the methane gas that is produced contributes to that as well. But at the same time, agriculture also holds part of the remedy by mitigating through reducing these green gas emissions by changing agriculture practices. And also what is important is we need to strengthen the resilience of rural people to help them cope with the additional threats that impinge on their food security. Particularly in the agriculture sector, climate change adaptation go hand in hand with mitigation. Climate change adaptation and mitigation measures need to be integrated into the overall development approaches and agenda, and there are opportunities for agriculture sector to adapt and also to contribute to mitigating climate challenge. I would like to talk about the FAO actions. As a UN agency, FAO is supporting countries, including South Africa, in both mitigating and adapting to climate change through a wide range of research-based and practical programs and projects. I will just mention a few here. There is a vast variety of these programs, but I'll just mention a few here, which include using less water, so water efficiency. For example, agriculture production through aquaponics, where fish and crop production is done in one place, and recycling the water for water production and all that, hydroponics using less water as well, conservation agriculture, as well as water harvesting, water recycling, reuse of grey water, and this can be done at both household level, small scale level, or at a large scale. Planting resistant crops. And the great news is that in South Africa and even in Africa, we have indigenous crops and breeds of animals that are drought resistant. And we need to increase the seed multiplication effort in order to preserve this, as well as to preserve our land. We also need to reduce food losses, and as well as follow sustainable diets. For example, consumption of less meat, buying food with less miles. That is, the food that we eat has to have the shortest distance from the farm to the plate. In addition, FAO also develops guidelines and training resources to support mitigation of the adaptation. So
Madam
I would like
Chikoko, please start to round up.
Okay, all right, that's fine. I only have 2 more slides, which I want to talk about the global campaign. I want to talk about the World Food Day itself. We know that the world has almost 800 billion people, and we're all connected, and natural resources, and we share basic needs of food and same challenges. And with the World Food Day is a global occasion where 150 countries come together to heighten the awareness and challenges we face in the plight of the food insecurity. And this is celebrated on 16th of October. And again, also by multi-targeted audiences, governments, cities, private companies, media, and individuals, as well as youth. And this has been celebrated since 1979, when it was first declared World Food Day. And the campaign calls for world solidarity in transforming food systems, a bid to foster inclusive economic growth that address inequalities and increase resilience. And I also want to say that World Food Day coincides with the FAO's birthday. This year, FAO 77 years, and the founding of FAO on 16th of October 1945 was a result of the devastating effects of World War II on food security, poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. And how was World Food Day celebrated here in South Africa? World Food Day, the national celebration was led by the Minister of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, Minister Toko Didiza, and the Mayor of Sidibeng Municipality, and the mayor team, as well as ambassadors, communities, and farmers. And some of the pictures that you show on the slide, I'm showing on the slide, are some of the highlights of the activities.
Madam Chikoko, please, you had only 5 minutes.
This is my last slide. The last slide. So, and again, we are here today reminding ourselves on this World Food Day conference on 25 October today, celebrating the World Food Day with this conference. And I appreciate everyone that has joined here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for giving us the background with regard to the World Food Day. So without wasting further time, then let me now introduce our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker is Prof. Julian May. Prof. Julian May is the director of the DSI NRF Center of Excellence in Food Security, UNESCO, chair in African food systems. Let me also then acknowledge that me and Prof. May, we are colleagues at the National Planning Commission. We really appreciate him giving us his time. So Prof. May, like I said, I'm coming to this conference very angry, and I checked the chat box. There are people who are agreeing with me, saying that enough is enough. It is time for action. And if you have monitored the chat box, we're not talking only to South Africans. We have got colleagues who are joining from all over the world. So please then take the podium and give us the keynote address.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. hope that you can share, you can see my screen and that it's now in full mode.
Yes.
Thank you, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this. I think this is maybe the 6th presentation that I have given since the start of the World Food Day month. It's really exciting how many people are concerned about food and are talking about food systems and the approaches that have been used now. You've asked me to talk about absorbing the shocks, climate change, and food security, and I've tried to put together a presentation that allows us to first talk about what framework should we be using to be able to understand this topic. And I've talked about a food systems approach as a way of understanding what is now being called more and more frequently the food system wicked problem. Then noting that we are presenting in South Africa, I will talk about the South African food paradox. But I think this is a paradox that characterizes many middle-income countries in Africa, where we have sufficient food, but we still have a large proportion of our population who are suffering from food and nutrition insecurity. I'll then give some description about the drivers of food system sustainability. And here I will be drawing on analysis that was actually undertaken for the FAO as part of the lead up to the UN Food System Summit that took place last year. This is from the South African Rapid Food System Assessment, and I think that the similar food system assessments were undertaken in many other countries in Africa. Then Dr. Chiloka has already mentioned some of those. And then lastly, I'll be talking about a research initiative that the Center of Excellence and the UNESCO Chair are spearheading, which is to develop living laboratories where we can co-produce knowledge for food system transformation. And these are in South Africa, Kenya, and Algeria. So I'd like to start off by depicting what has become increasingly talked about as the FSNet Africa Food Systems Framework. This was an attempt to take existing frameworks for food systems analysis that have been developed elsewhere, such as that developed by the high level of panel of experts, and rework these so that they would be relevant to the African context. FSNet Africa is an initiative that is hosted at the University of Pretoria by the Arua Center of Excellence in Sustainable Food Systems, and at the moment is hosting about 20 early career scholars who are applying this framework to their own research work. The idea is once we've done this, we'll then readapt the framework to make it more applicable and more relevant to the specifics of the African context. So the first thing to note about this diagram is that the drivers of food system change are often systems themselves, like the water system or the energy system. That institutions are particularly important in the African context. These are institutions that can advocate for certain kinds of behavior. They can regulate the behavior. They can regulate how we actually, the activities that we undertake, and how many of those regulatory institutions would be the departments and governments, such as our Department of Agriculture, Land and Rural Development. And finally, institutions can also educate. They may be cultural institutions, the value systems that we hold, or they may be the universities, or indeed FUNREPAN itself is an institution that helps to educate people about the food system. The core food system then comprises the food value chains and the food environments. And then the important outcomes that we now recognize as emanating from a food system are food and nutritional security, urban and rural livelihoods, and environmental sustainability. Food systems present a particular kind of problem. Now, I'm an economist and I tend to see all problems through the eyes of an economist. And the first is to recognize that to produce food, a working food system is a joint product of private and public action. In other words, food systems don't just come into play because the private sector or consumers are involved, but also because the public sector plays a very important role, both in producing food, but also in regulating its safety, regulating its health, and regulating what indeed is considered to be food. It's a public good, and by a public good, it means it's subject to what economists call collective action problems. Somehow we have to find ways of working together, even though we may be pursuing different goals and have different value systems and have different priorities. It means then that economics doesn't work particularly well when you have a good like this. There are market imperfections, and in particular, these are imperfections that conceal externalities. When I benefit from something, but it's at the cost of somebody else, or when I produce something, but it means that the river downstream is polluted because I've used a production process that's polluting. A key thing then is that when you have a problem like this, that even though we may have a common concern for food security and nutrition security, we fail to find ways to act together. Planners often refer to problems like this as being wicked. In other words, there's no clear answer. There's no right and wrong solutions. There's a continuum of solutions from good to bad. We have to live with different explanations of what the problem is and who's causing it, and we have to recognize that we have different interests. And critically, as is the case with food security, when we think about climate change, time is running out. So the South African food system paradox is an idea that we conceptualized when asked by the FAO to bring together the research that we've been doing in food systems analysis over the last decade or so. It's to try and depict the fact that we have this unusual situation in South Africa. Oops, sorry. My apologies, I've jumped over my slide and I can't seem to get back. I will talk about it from memory then. The food system paradox is that South Africa produces sufficient food to be able to feed our population. We have world-class science that allows us to decide how to improve that food system. We have adopted all of the policies that many other countries have adopted, and yet we fail to bring about significant change in our food system outcomes. We continue to have a double burden of malnutrition with very high levels of childhood stunting. About a quarter of our children are stunted, very high for a country of our economic status, as well as a situation where we have a high prevalence of overweight and obesity, and this overweight and obesity is associated with poverty, not with wealth. This is termed often as a double burden of malnutrition, even sometimes as a triple burden of malnutrition when we recognize that there are also micronutrient deficiencies. The FAO asked us to identify just 4 key sustainability questions, forcing us as researchers to prioritize what we thought were the most important. We proposed that improving nutrition was one of the key sustainability questions for South Africa, sustainable agriculture, which is what I was focused on in this discussion today, but also leveling the food system playing field, recognizing that South Africa as a highly unequal country also has an unequal playing field in terms of the economic power of producers along the different food value chains. And finally, to improve food system governance, recognizing that in fact we have a sophisticated policies concerning food system governance, and yet we still have these poor food system outcomes. To do the analysis, we then took a food system framework, such as the one that I described to you earlier, the FSNet framework, and we analyzed all of the research that we could identify that has been able to identify the different issues that we were concerned about. What you see here is our food system analysis that we did, focusing on the question of more sustainable agricultural practices in South Africa. This really lies at the heart of how climate change is going to produce shocks and how those shocks are going to translate into impacts upon society and on the food system that we operate. I'll not go through the entire diagram because it's a complex diagram, and as you see there are a great many boxes and arrows, but essentially what we were able to do was to distill the research findings from more than 100 papers into identifying the components of this the sustainability question, and then translate that into a set of policy levers that we were asked to then propose as the ways of resolving this issue. If you would like to have a look at the report on South Africa, you can find it on the FAO website under the Rapid Food System Assessment papers. You can also find FAO reports on almost 20 other African countries where similar analysis was undertaken. Right now, FAO are now putting together a synthesis report which tries to identify the common strands through all of these reports. Now, what are the key drivers of system sustainability in South Africa? The first is recognizing that our natural environment is already arid to semi-arid. Only 14% of the land in South Africa is potentially arable, and 70% of that land is degraded. Our water demand is expected to exceed availability by 2025, and in many parts of the country, that has already happened. We're also experiencing demographic change, where we have displaced urbanization. In other words, the result of the apartheid era, when people were forcibly relocated into what essentially are rural slums, and now a process of rapid urbanization, where those people are now moving into the cities of South Africa. 2/3 of our population increase is taking place in our metropolitan areas, which occupy just 2% of the land area. We have, in many ways, unsustainable metropolitization. And finally, although we have agriculture intensification, a positive feature, in many instances, this has produced is jobless. It is not generating new jobs, and there's a reliance on green revolution technologies. While these were once very useful in being able to improve food security in South Africa, frankly, some of these technologies are more than a decade old. They almost are the industrial revolution of agriculture, and we need to be looking at new and better technologies to be able to take agriculture forward. The next thing to consider is, what is the situation with our land and our climate? I think we're getting used to seeing maps like the one on the right, with vast areas now depicted as being red, as alarming. In this instance, this map is talking about the irradiation of the sun, essentially how much solar power is hitting the land. In this instance, you can see the dense areas, the bright red areas that cover most of South Africa, where agricultural production is difficult because the already very high levels of heat and evaporation. The key thing is, as I'll show you next, these issues are actually spreading beyond what the areas that were traditionally affected by heat and by drought. The graph on the right is also interesting. Here we've got depicted the land area of South Africa, the share of that land which is agricultural land, the share of that which is cropland, the share of that which is arable, and finally that tiny little block on the bottom, the land area that is equipped for irrigation. So while we are a large country, a very small share of our land is suitable for arable, and a tiny proportion is already equipped for irrigation. Now, I received this interesting chart from Emma Archer this morning when I was casting around looking for information that would enable me to easily depict what is the impact of extended drought in South Africa. These images show the percentage of average seasonal greenness, in other words, how much is growing, for 6-month periods running from 2014 to 2020. Essentially, this is the period of an extended drought that took place in the Karoo, possibly is still taking place in the Karoo, and its impact on what was growing. You can see in the top left corner in June 2014, the extent to which the area was characterized by greenness, by plants growing, and how by the time you get down to the bottom right corner, the extent to which the landscape has now been affected by extended drought and high heat conditions. By 2020, you can start to see the reversal as greenness is starting to appear again, as we hope that the drought has come to an end. But it gives us some image of what happens when we have experienced long periods of heat and of drought. Then turning to demographic change. The map on the left depicts areas of population concentration in South Africa. And you'll see how a large share of our land, that part that was affected directly by heat, is significantly underpopulated. And the concentrations of population around the metropolitan areas. You can also see the dramatic increase in urban population following the changes in government in 1994, and how that population change has continued to grow. So what are the shocks? Well, as I said earlier, Dr. Chaluka has already mentioned some of those. Here are a few more, some which I hadn't actually come across until I started preparing for this lecture. So in addition to the heat stress and the sunburn of plants that was mentioned earlier, the shifts in rainfall patterns also mentioned earlier, we also have issues of plants and trees flowering earlier, which often might mean that fruit crops or vegetable crops do not perform at the level that we would hope. There are issues of preterm calving or lambing, where animals are giving birth earlier, animals indeed, in fact, humans as well. A decline in animal fertility, failures of our phytosanitary systems, migrations of pests and of pathogens, acidification of the ocean, increased demand for feed because the pasture is not available, rising salinity, and obviously the loss of livelihoods. I did note in the chat that Emil asked, are there positive effects of climate change? And yes, Emil, there certainly are. But they tend to be appropriated by those farmers that are better resourced and more able to adapt. An example in the Western Cape where I live is the use of undercover farming, where farmers are able to dramatically increase their yields and cut the risks from pests and birds, but you need 250,000 Rand a hectare to be able to do something like that. So it is a way of mitigating, but it comes at a price. And also some ecosystems are going to shift, which means areas that where crop certain types of production may not have been possible will now become more suitable. An example is likely to be the movement of wheat production from the Western Cape towards the Eastern Cape. So indeed, there are positive effects, but it depends who gets them. How do we absorb? Well, the climate change plan says we need to plan, act, observe and learn, and adjust. And I've already drawn your attention to the food system profile that we did for the FAO. These are the two levers that we identified to be able to, which we felt would be important to absorb the shocks of climate change and to deal with agricultural sustainability. As I indicated, the FAO were insistent, only two policy levers, and so we had to prioritize. We felt the first was to support agroecological transitions, that we need to change our behavior of both producers and consumers, and that transition here is the key word. The important thing is here, we're not saying that this is a transition back towards organic forms of production. This is where we use science to work with nature. It's going well beyond the efforts of what was undertaken during the Green Revolution to better understand how plant adapts, how soil health matters, and how we improve our soil health. So we need to think about moving our dominant farm model away towards regenerative practices with less chemical inputs, greater precision, managing the additional costs and risks that will come out of climate change. We need to think about also introducing options for conditional payments for environmental services, whereby we pay our farmers to ensure that the environment is regenerative. Ultimately, this means adopting what I've termed really smart agri. This is agriculture that makes use of fourth industrial revolution technologies, as well as greater sophistication in understanding the relationship between human production, animals, and ultimately the production in the land. The next, which we found as a priority, at least certainly in the case of South Africa, is to link our land reform to place-based small, medium, and enterprise development in agribusiness. In South Africa, we've taken too long to deal with the key issue of land reform, and we need to think about how to deal with the implementation failure that we've experienced up to date to try and reincorporate marginalized Black farmers into the food economy. We think that's important that we connect land reform with a local environment, a business environment whereby the producers of food have access to markets and are able to better meet the needs of the consumers that are nearby, as well as those gain access to international markets to export food. We've suggested that, thank you, I will be there, I'll be on time. We've recommended a place-based approach whereby we focus on specific locations, working with local authorities, with the municipality to better integrate farming systems into the local economy. And finally, we need to think about ways of promoting local innovation platforms and support hubs that assist farmers and agri-producers. So I'll end on this slide. As a research center, one of the things we're doing is to try and apply our place-based approach into what we've termed living laboratories. We have 4 of these at the moment underway. I've depicted here the Breeda Valley municipality, which is an area 2 hours north of Cape Town, but we're also working in Matatiele in the Eastern Cape in South Africa, Nakuru in Kenya, and in Constantine in Algeria. The area which I'm working myself most directly is the Breeda Valley municipality, and I put up my motivation there. If you take a look at the list of characteristics of the Breeda Valley, it has just 1% of South Africa's farms, but produces 6% of our butternuts, 29% of our table grapes, 45% of the land is arable, and 91% of that arable land is cultivated. It makes certainly for a very interesting living laboratory to try and co-produce knowledge of how to adapt to food system transformation that is the result of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Then you were just right on time. So we won't have a question and answer session. There will be Q&A towards the end of our program. We have got 30 minutes allocated for that. So for me, then I will be handing over to the coming agenda items. But before I do that, let me appreciate the true welcoming remarks from Madam Tuku. The second one from Dr. Chikoko, and also let me appreciate the keynote from Prof. May. Maybe to also then invite my colleague Tembi to say that when you go to the panel discussion, let's please then use the keynote as a framing guideline to make sure that from the deliberation, we are moving from rhetoric to action. The next agenda item for our conference, we want to keep the memory as much as we are commemorating this day, not in a good mood, which is not celebratory, but making sure that we have got agency to do things in a different way. We are moving now to take a group photo, but that will be preceded by a 2-minute video showcasing why we gathered here.
Please smile, all right? Don't hide your smile. I'm taking the picture now. Thank you. Wow, we want some actions. There are some uncertainties as well. We need food, we need humanity, food security, public investment. What else? Equity now, not tomorrow, but now. Yes, looking good, everyone. Please keep your smile. Some last pictures. Sorry to hold your smile. It's so beautiful that we want to keep it. All right, over to you, TM. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Kantro, for facilitating the photo session and for the video. Now we're going now to our panel discussion. I'm inviting my colleague who is our Director for Policy Research Analysis, which is our programming area at FANAPAN, Ms. Tembi Mwamakamba, to facilitate the session. So I won't be coming back, colleagues. Thank you so much for being good audience. So we are now sitting at 108 participants. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Matsavandila, for the opening session, and to all the speakers. As we transition to the panel discussion, please allow me to welcome our panelists. As I introduce you, please just turn on your camera and greet the participants. We will try to have the cameras on as we have the discussion and see if the bandwidth allows. If it doesn't, at least you would have seen everybody. So we have 4 speakers joining us this afternoon. We have Miss Eva Morales, who is from the Cambridge Judge Business School. She's a program leader at Cambridge University, and she is leading work around the circular economy and sustainability. Hi, Mr. Morales. We then have Dr. Simpiwe Nqaweni, who is the Chief Executive Officer at the National Agriculture Marketing Council. He's an agricultural economist, and he has lectured at the University of Pretoria and served within the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries as well. Welcome, Dr. Nqaweni. Then we have Mr. Spio Gift Mafulega, who is the Managing Director of Mpiwe Agricultural Group Private Limited. He's a commercial farmer and an agricultural entrepreneur. His company is involved in crop farming, agricultural services, and agricultural development, including contract farming, mechanization services, and agriculture technical services. So Mr. Mafulega has his hands on the ground. Welcome, Mr. Mafulega. Then last but not least, we have Mr. Azvitakadzi Tuwani, who is a meteorologist at SABC News. He is a graduate with a degree in meteorology and an honors degree in geoinformatics from the University of Pretoria. He currently leads the SABC Weather Desk, and he's a member of the International Weather and Climate Forum, a leading pioneer in climate education. Welcome, Mr. Tuwani. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. As we have all heard, Professor May has really unpacked for us what it means to absorb the shocks in the context of a changing climate. And he's also outlined what achieving food security will take. Now I want us to get into specifics. Talking food security, I know it's more than just the food we buy from the shops. And climate change also means more than the floods we have seen becoming more frequent. What I would really like for us to do now is to really spotlight different components that make up our food systems. And I want to start with you, Ms. Morales. I know you're passionate about sustainability, and I can't help but wonder if our food systems are sustainable. And when we're talking food systems, right, we're talking from farm to fork. And let's start at the farm level. Let's talk about our soils. Are our soils good enough? Can we still depend on them to produce the food that is required?
Thank you so much, and pleasure to meet everybody, and thank you for inviting me. Very passionate about sustainability, that is right. And the simple answer to your question is no, our soils are not good enough, which has a huge environmental, social, and economic implication for the world, because soil degradation leads to the inability to sequester carbon and filter water, and also lead to the loss of biodiversity, and also the potential to yield higher and healthier production of food, the food that we so need to feed the world. But just to put this into context, according to scientific evidence, and as we've seen in some UN reports, and also Professor May has spoke, 40% of the world soil has degraded over the past decades. And this threatens half of the global GDP, which is an equivalent of $44 trillion. So it's an economic driver there as well. So it's important to note that from an environmental perspective, what I think is alarming is that the world soils have degraded between 50 to 70% of the region, have lost the carbon that is released into the air as carbon dioxide. And this is mostly due to unsustainable agricultural methods, such as excessive tillage, overgrazing, and also the use of pesticides and chemical fertilizers.
So is it all lost? I know these days there's talk of soil regeneration, right? And what is that all about? And how does it help fight, desertification and helps improve food production? Can you speak a bit about that?
For sure. So food regeneration means that we can use more sustainable and organic farming practices. This means that we can use methods such as, for example, cover crops. This will help, or crop rotation. and then use different sort of practices that they're going to recover sort of the water content of the soil. And I can talk, for example, so soil regeneration in essence is returning those nutrients to the soil and increasing that biodiversity and water retention that I just talked about. This can be done again through those different type of methods. Agroforestry is another one, composting, but also the use of biochar. And biochar is something I'm quite passionate about. And HiGeo is a climate tech organization where we're working on addressing and linking two very different, very important and critical and pressing issues. And here we're talking about climate change on one side, through cultivation and production of microalgae to sequester carbon and remove emissions. And then we're looking to soil regeneration through the production of biochar from the microalgae dry mass. So we use the dry mass of the microalgae and then we convert it into biochar. By doing this, we are using a circular economy approach. So we're closing the loop here with the production of microalgae on one side, to sequester the carbon, that you could sequester as much as 150 tons of carbon for 85 tons of biomass per hectare. So this is quite significant. So we're creating that byproduct then with biochar. So just to give you a little bit of information about biochar, using biochar added to the soil can help retain water and also add nutrients, which is super important for the health of the topsoil. So this means that when biochar is added to poor soil, the yields of production increase year on year. So biochar made of dry microalgae, for example, this is something that we're working on, offers higher benefits by providing higher nutrients, because biochar microalgae provides proteins and lipids and some carbohydrates and neutral acids that improve the pH of the soil. And studies have shown actually that biochar helps increase water retention by 46%. And Dr. May was talking about these arid lands in South Africa. So this is very important. It's a product that can really help sort of remediate the ground. And desert soil, for example, it will also help increase the yield of production by 29 to 50%, according to some studies. And we've seen sort of, for example, tomatoes might have that sort of increase for 50% of yield. But of course, we need to think about this as a long term. So it's not going to happen overnight. So we need to think about that long-term vision of investment in this type of products.
Yep. And I mean, it sounds also like this could potentially be another area that could be developed for young people to get employed in. I'm going to come back to you. I just want you to think about what are some of the sort of opportunity or maybe the potential to unlock agriculture to create jobs for youth. And I like this biochar angle that you've introduced, because yes, it will improve soil fertility, eventually increasing productivity, but what also are the sort of employment sort of creation opportunities or job creation that can arise from that? So just think about that for a minute. I want to move on now to Dr. Nqaweni. I mean, we are now moving, like I said, when we're talking about food systems, we're thinking from farm to fork, right? So now I want to move off from the farm a little bit and look at how food gets to where it needs to go. And I'm asking Dr. Nqaweni this because he specifically comes from the National Agriculture Marketing Council, and I want to just understand how the markets sort of factor into this whole discussion of food security as well as climate change. So I'll come back to you, Eva. Let me move on to Dr. Nqaweni. I want you to speak specifically on the impact of climate change on agriculture markets. What are the trends that we're seeing?
Thank you so much, Thembi, and greetings to all the attendees. Indeed, a very fascinating, very difficult, very daunting topic, and a very serious one. We heard from TM that we need to move away from rhetoric into action. And I think Professor May's presentation highlights the fact that this is a very difficult thing to achieve, and we've tried in some cases many interventions which don't seem to be as effective as we would like them to be. So in terms of the questions that you're asking me specifically, I think the first point I would like to mention is that I don't think there's a question anymore about the disruptions that will continue to take place in supply chains, specifically of agriculture and food products. I think the question is who will be affected globally, how will it play out, and over what time horizon, for example. I think one of the important things to note is that different regions globally will be affected differently and unevenly. And I think one of the main messages that we are getting also is that developing countries will tend to be affected a bit more than developed countries. I think for reasons that are obvious in terms of the different levels of development and different abilities to be able to respond, for example. Interestingly, within the developing regions, South Asia, Asia Pacific, Latin America are viewed as those that will be affected more than, for example, your sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, and Middle East, which is quite interesting. And the reason for that is that some research has shown that there could be a positive CO2 effects, for example, in these areas in the form of water use efficiency, fertilization effects, for example, that might attenuate these effects. Now, I'm not really a scientist, so apparently there's a big debate around these effects. So this basically underlines my point around the fact that different regions will be affected differently. Now, coming closer to the issue of markets, and particularly some of the crops that globally will probably be mostly affected going forward. If you align the fact that, for example, regions like South Asia, Latin America, and so on will be most affected, and you look at the crops that are being produced in those regions, you look at rice, you look at pulses, soybean, wheat, palm oil, for example, we're looking at quite a lot of disruptions in those markets. Now, another message I would like to put across is that when we look at these impacts, we should look at the entire value chain and not just, I think you've made that point, facilitator, in your introduction here. If you look at the fact that 30 to 40% of value added and the cost, for example, at the processing, logistics, and wholesale levels, and because there has been quite a lot of investment in these middle parts of the value chain, especially in developing countries, which I said earlier will be affected mostly by climate change. If you look at the production and harvest, the increased cost of production due to cost of insurance, for example, will be some of the impacts that you'll be seeing. The need for irrigation and the costs that are associated with that as part of the adaptation. Post-harvest losses and the damages that will increase over time. At the processing level, the changes in productivity and quality of the products, for example, and at the logistics level and the trading level, disruptions in product flows. For example, if you have a short-term shock in the form of flooding, your transportation, for example, will be affected, and the roads will be affected, and you won't be able to move your products to where you want to move them. So that will mean some financial losses for those players in those parts of the value chain. But in summary, if you look at how markets are affected by climate change, I think we've seen recently that this has been translated mostly in the form of price increases due to certain shortages in certain regions where some of the crops and agricultural products and food products are produced. In South Africa, for example, if you look at the 2022 marketing season, we've seen some of these supply shortages playing out in some of the high value crops, such as tomatoes, onions, cabbages, and so on. We've seen price increases as high as 47% for onions, cabbages 27%, as well as, tomatoes were 47%, onions 27%, and cabbages 21% during the marketing season. Finally, as NAMC, we analyze on a monthly basis a 28-item basket, looking at the trends and the increases in prices on a month-to-month basis. And if you look at the price of this basket, what it was in January 2021, it was standing at about 973 rands. And if you look at September 2022, this has increased up to 1,122. So most of the impact and how, in terms of how markets have been affected, you see them translating in the form of prices, as I've just illustrated.
Yeah.
I'll just pause here for now. Thank you so much.
Well, I mean, that's really interesting. And I mean, I've felt it as well when I've gone to buy my cooking oil, and I think it has just surprised me. I think each time I go to the shops now, I get surprised by how expensive things are becoming. And I find myself now even saying some things are luxuries. I don't need them. You know, the things that I used to buy on a regular, they're now luxuries. And I have to say, no, you know, another time when I've got extra money, then I'll buy that. And I'm seeing that more and more. But then I wonder as well, because we're thinking of disruptions from climate change. That's what we have just been talking about. But I realize that we also have shocks that emanate from, say, some sort of man-made global events, right, that we still have to deal with. I'm just thinking of the crisis in Ukraine and Russia right now, because I think that was another shock to the sort of global food market. But I wonder if you can speak to how that has impacted the markets in South Africa, because we might think that Ukraine is all the way far, but then somehow, you know, these things filter down. I want you to just comment on that a bit.
Thanks for that. I think I'll look at the case of how South Africa has been impacted, but also touch a bit on and how the SADC region has also been impacted, benefiting from some of the work we've done with FAO in this area. I think starting with South Africa, I think South Africa happens not to have very strong import ties with Russia and Ukraine. If you look at South Africa only sourcing 2.6% of its total agricultural imports from that region in 2021. So while the direct trade is not as much, however, the South Africa has been affected indirectly because these two countries are major suppliers of agricultural products to the global market. And this has an important bearing on commodity prices, of course. So as a result of this conflict, South Africa, as I say, has been impacted mostly through price transmission rather than direct availability and supply. In terms of going into the region, obviously, depending on the level of connectedness of a country within the region, in terms of its sourcing products from that region, then the impacts will obviously be different. In terms of the region as a whole, the trade between it and Russia and Ukraine equates to about 2.3%. It's not as strong in terms of the entire region. So some of the products that are affected, we're looking at fertilizer from the input side, wheat, oil, and sunflower, for example, where Russia and Ukraine collectively supply between 5 all the way up to 14%, depending on which country you are in. And in some of these countries, the trade relations are growing with that region, which implies that the region has been negatively impacted by the conflict, and this has affected food security. Once again, I think as in the case of South Africa, the effects have been also through price hikes and through price transmission. The conflict has constrained the ability of the SADC countries to produce their own food, as they rely heavily, for example, on imported fertilizers and seeds, which originate from this region. Yeah. Additionally to this, I think we have seen the fuel price rises as well, which has affected not just the region, but I think the entire globe, which has also an impact in terms of global prices of commodities in general.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I can attest to the fuel prices. You know, thinking about filling up the car now, it's really some maths work that has to happen, balancing the budget and the like. But thank you so much. I think I'm going to come back to you because in your intervention, you also mentioned something and it got me thinking about the commodities, which commodities are more affected than others. You spoke about wheat and, things that we get from Russia. But also, I want you to perhaps thinking in the context of climate change, going back there, to say which commodities are most affected and what sort of strategies is the government putting in place. I know that there was the agriculture master plan that was approved early this year, and I'll be interested to hear about that. But please allow me now to move from the sort of marketing side of things to hear from Mr. Gif Mafulega. So we have heard from the researchers, we heard from Eva, we've heard from economists just now, but now we want to go to the boots on the ground. Mr. Mafulega, you handle the soil. When I opened the panel, I was asking about the quality of the soil. You have your hands on the soil every day. And I wonder if you can tell us how real climate change is to you, how it has impacted your business, and what you've done to adapt to these sort of changes that we have experienced.
Thank you very much, Thembi, and would like to greet everyone that is part of the proceedings. My name is Sipiwo Gift Mafulega. I farm in the Highveld region of South Africa, which means we get frost in winter, heavy frost in winter, and extreme heat in summer. So to just shoot straight to the questions that you've posed to me, I'll try and be as practical as possible in my responses. Well, most of the points have been uttered by the previous speakers, from heat to drought to having to adapt with changing weather patterns, what we never used to expect happening in awkward times, and all of a sudden winters turning to be summers. But I want to paint to you some practical things that happen on a farm level. We produce a variety of crops, from vegetables to grain crops, and we are currently experiencing lack of rainfall. You could be an irrigation farmer, but during a specific time of a season, when seasons change, they call for what they are used to. Rainfall is you get a spring rainfall, you get a summer rainfall. So whether you've got irrigation, if you do not get your rainfall on time, you are already being offset from increasing your production, or you're getting already affected in what you might have planned. Climate change has affected us quite big. If you look at the production input costs, having to wait for rains and having to not sure when is your planting window, and even up to harvesting, when you would have to harvest and you're having heavy rains, therefore damaging your crop and eventually affecting your product and getting your product downgraded. Those are practical impacts because they knock on your pocket and eventually play big on your profit margins. If you are a crop farmer in my region and you are not within 30 and 50% of margin, which is not your net profit, but what you can make out of producing and delivering, taking out the production cost, you are already at the back foot in terms of growing as a farmer. You know, that calls for you as a farmer to adapt. What have we done to adapt to such impact? Some of the points have been mentioned by Prof. May. We do irrigation. We've had to adapt in terms of stretching our planting season. If it's mating season, stretching it from 30 days to even up to 60 days, where you would probably, just to mitigate the risk, plant some of the crop early and some of the similar crop a bit later in the season, because one doesn't know what will happen during the growing season. We've had to adapt more to technology. At a production level, the most impactful technologies are precision technology on mechanization, as well as mobile technology. You know, there's various mobile apps that any farmer can download and use to try and stay within business during the challenges of climate change. You know, thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Simphiwe. I think what's sort of interesting to me is you're mentioning having to adapt, but I'm wondering at what cost has that come to you? You know, because I would imagine, like, for instance, you said you'd have to stretch the season from 30 days to 60 days. And certainly that comes with its own sort of expenses. And I know from your profile that part of what you do is also facilitate contract farming for farmers. And if I remember well, what contract farming is that you sort of get into a deal with a certain sort of company to say, we will provide you with this certain amount of, say, cabbages, you know, at this time. And given the changes that you have had to sort of do in terms of stretching your growing seasons and the like, are you able to meet those commitments to the people that you are providing with your products? And also maybe, I mean, you are in this farming business, and I imagine that there are different types of farmers. Is there a difference between the challenges that young farmers and the older generation of farmers face, or is it all in the same? And is there a platform for you to come together to learn from each other?
Well, thank you for that. Just on the first one, the cost. What is the cost of all these disruptions? I think the biggest cost for me it's an opportunity cost. You would have made so much money if you had planted at this time, but because of challenges relating to climate, you could not. So that's the biggest cost, because then you lose a market window that could have paid much better. Another cost in terms of what we do then to mitigate the effects on infrastructure alone. Prof. May indicated that to put a shade net, which we have done as well for our vegetable crops, would cost you anything above 250,000 rands a hectare. And it does not mean you are eliminating the risks completely. You are trying to ensure that you maximize your profit margins. And in terms of youth and the challenges, you know, there's plenty. You know, with as young farmers, as youth, we lack track record, we lack credibility, we lack networks, we lack experience, and most of all, we do not have philosophy. We are still new in the field. We have not had a grasp of things. Obviously, challenges of climate are not new. It is just the intensity and the pattern in which it's happening. So all those lacks that I've counted makes it difficult for a young farmer to mobilize resources. So as an example, if you were to speak to someone and asking for them to provide a piece of land for you, be it government, be it a private person, be it your relative for that matter, they look at you as a young person who just wants to play around. So those lacks are a biggest hindrance in mobilizing resources like finance and land and even labor, because skillful people are normally older people. So if they look at you and you would want to use their expertise, they look at you and they may not be relate well with you because of your age. If you look on the other hand, the older generation, they've got their own challenges of succession. They don't know whether what they've built over the years, will they be able to still give to their generations to come. So challenges do differ, and there are many ways that we are trying to mitigate them.
Okay, yeah, no, thank you for highlighting that. I'm hoping by the end of this conversation, we will have ideas on how to create a critical mass of young agropreneurs like yourself. But maybe let me leave you to chew on that for a little bit. Let me go to the weatherman. Let me speak to Mr. Tuani, who can help us understand. We've been talking climate change, we've been talking floods, we've been talking all sorts of things. But perhaps we need to understand what is the difference between climate change and weather, and how is climate change affecting the weather and why? I think only a weatherman can answer this question.
All right. Thanks very much for that question. I'm always eager to answer such a question. And yes, let me just share a little bit that I've done. So looking at this, we do have different kinds of weathers, as you have mentioned. Starting with the weather itself, to what is it? So I will try and just define that. So the weather on a daily basis, it is a state of the atmosphere in simple terms. So in there, we'd look at the cloud cover, we'd look at your temperatures, and again, we'd look at your rainfall, pressure, and humidity. So there can be observed weather, and again, the weather that we forecast. So this is what we are expecting on a specific day. So it is also what we are going to record, and that is what we use to measure our forecast. So this is what we call our daily weather. Now, looking at the climate, that it is the same thing, it is the weather, but it differs with time. The climate would be averaged in a period of time, let's say maybe 10 years. And in there, that's where we are going to see different kinds of weathers are being depicted due to the climate of that area. So the position or the situation or where your country is situated will also constitute to a specific kind of climate. This is why you also find when we go to agriculture, we have different kinds of crops, and that is also being driven by the kinds of climate in those different zones. So going further to look at climate change, this refers to a long-term shift in temperatures or all those weather patterns that we do look at, or the atmospheric states. So there are various impacts that we do get from this. I remember some few years ago, we were talking to like, this is going to happen in the future, only to realize that it is already happening. And also looking at your temperatures, we have seen a huge change when it comes to temperatures for a number of years, that the temperature has been gradually increasing, and this is global temperature. So a 1 degree rise over the globe can constitute to like maybe 4 degree in a local area or 2 degree in some areas, depending on how those areas are situated. And then again, the reason why climate change drives our weather or has an impact on our weather now, it is because the amount of energy, as you can see to the graph that I'm looking at, towards the end of it, you will see so many red bars. And those red bars constitute to the amount of temperatures that have increased globally. So this means that there's lots and lots of energy that is being released and being stored in the atmosphere, meaning that that energy can be stored and be used with these weather systems. That's why we've seen huge tropical cyclones, and more often we've recorded so many category 5. There's been also talks of category 6, but I don't know if that has been approved yet, but we're still sitting on category 5 as the biggest tropical cyclone there is, and we have seen disasters that come with that. We have seen house being like this one, that happened in Mozambique. So they move and then affect South Africa as well. You can see the amount of water that we have received on the surface. We cannot comprehend it. And again, this is what's happening because of that energy that we have stored, that we have released from the surface. It remains stored in the atmosphere, then it goes to the weather systems. Your tropical cyclones gets very big, your drought gets severe and more frequent, your heat waves and so forth. So these are the things that we are getting from the climate change. And again, looking at our daily weather, our temperatures, they keep on going higher and higher. We do know that in winter, we're supposed to feel like we are freezing or get very cold for a certain period of time. But if you could see, it's like this year, the winter was very short. And this is what we see on our daily as we present the weather, because we can quickly see that the temperatures have changed or they've started to increase, whereas we're still expecting them to remain low. And again, looking at the amount of rainfall that we are receiving. Recently in KwaZulu-Natal, we have received lots and lots of rainfall, and that has been unprecedented because we have never received up to 380 millimeters of rainfall in 24 hours. But we have recorded that and we have seen that. And not only in South Africa, whereas we go out throughout the globe, just checking the weather patterns and what's happening, we have seen huge fires in Europe. And again, in some areas, we have seen some huge floods, a whole lot of weather is happening, and it is becoming more and more severe. So it is getting very, how would I say it? It is becoming extremely dangerous to us, for us as civilians, because now if we do not have any means to control this global temperature, it means that we need now to adapt to the current weather. And again, we need to move further, because as we are continuing to live, we continue to emit that carbon dioxide or so many other gases as well that trap that energy. And again, it means that more severe weather, more severe tropical cyclones, severe droughts, heat waves, they will be coming, and we need to be prepared for that.
Okay, all right. So I think you've given us the sort of in-between scientific explanation and in-between the layman. So now I want you to imagine somebody watching the news, right? And then at the end of the news report, there's the weather report, right? The weather forecast. So is that weather forecast still reliable? Can we sort of take that at its word? And if they say it's going to rain tomorrow and we know it's going to rain?
Yeah, yes, we can still do that. One thing I would tell you is that in weather, we do have researchers as well. So the researchers, what they do is they continue to research ways how to improve our forecast and how to make it way better than it is today. And it moves with the time, with the effects of climate change being constituted into our models or forecasting machines. So that means that we can still rely on our climate, on our weather forecast, because on a day-to-day, we still say it is going to be partly cloudy. And when you wake up, you still see there are some clouds in some areas, and in some part of the sky, I can still see the blue sky. And moving further, we'll tell you that we are expecting 30 to 60% chance of thunder showers. And you will see that. You will hear some thunder somewhere, you would see that it rained over that area, but just over my house and maybe my area, it didn't happen. That only means that the forecast is still true, and it is becoming more and more precise as we go to the future, due to the research power that we have, the computational power that we have, and the much better models that we are creating. And I can tell you, in South Africa, the weather service is so precise when it comes to weather forecasting, and you can only check that or test that on your day-to-day weather forecast. And if they say 30% chance of thunder showers going to 60, just look outside and see. If you hear thunder, just know that it rained somewhere, maybe not over your house. And if they say 60 and you would see a little bit of rainfall, it has happened because we are expecting it to happen in that way. So I urge the people to still totally rely on the daily weather forecast, because it is very precise. And we have seen that we've been forecasting some of the weather. Like I would receive a weather forecast that says, well, tomorrow it's going to be like this. And I'll be like, but tomorrow we're still in winter. And I can see that the temperatures, they are starting to rise or to go very high. So that is something that we're not expecting, but it is happening. And it shows that our models, they are moving, or they are using the inputs that are coming in with climate change to give us a precise weather forecast.
Excellent, because sometimes I really wanted to rain over my house, but then it rains like 2 streets away from me. So actually, let me get you to think a bit about what the forecast for this coming season is going to be, because we are getting into November, and traditionally in this region, we know that in November, we expect rains, right? So that our farmers can start planting, and then would have harvest in April, May, you know, it's like, that's how it's been for years. So I want to know what the sort of focus for the season is. But let me hold you there. I know your slide is already up on the board, but I just want to go to the questions in the chat. So if maybe you can take down your slide for now, and then we'll come back there, because there've been some interest as well in the chat to what has been discussed. And I want to encourage everybody to just pop their question through the chat as we are talking, and you feel something stands out, then you just drop it in there. Earlier on, I spoke to Eva, who spoke about biochar, and there's real interest in terms of biochar. So I want to go back to Eva, then I'll go back to Simpiwe, and then I'll come back to you. So in terms of maybe coming back to Eva, because I had my own question as well, that I had given you on the potential of agriculture to create jobs for youth, right? I want you to speak a bit of about that, but then also perhaps maybe you can also comment on what are the benefits of using, do the benefits of using biochar outweigh the carbon emissions generated by making it? This is a question that came from Henriette Vermark, who is asking, what are the trade-offs here? The benefits of using biochar, do they outweigh the carbon emissions that come from generating or making it? Eva.
Thank you so much. So I will start with the question that you asked me about generating jobs for youth. And I think sort of building in some of the comments of the fellow panelists, I think that it's important to incentivize farmers and make agriculture and farming more attractive. And I think the private and public sector here have a real important role to play, because I mean, we hear that some of the barriers perceived in youth is working in the sector are linked to a lack of financing, a lack of skills and status and so on. So we need to remove those barriers. And there are some incentive mechanisms for this, which is, for example, zero interest loans and so on, and the removal of bureaucracy. And another incentive is also carbon farming, which brings me back to biochar. Okay, this is what we're talking about, where carbon credits can be sold to companies to carbon offset, for carbon offsetting and generating additional income for farmers as well. And here, using organic farming and using biochar, for example, is going to generate and sequester carbon into the soil, as well as provide more yields, but also additional income from carbon markets to the farmers. So this is an incentive to also bring more youth to the sector. But I think it's also important to look beyond farming as well and link farming to innovation to create jobs that they're going to be looking at, for example, other areas through the value chain, not just sort of farming, sort of looking at storage, logistics and processing, manufacturing and so on. So thinking about sort of youth emerging, those jobs emerging from the farm. But there are also great initiatives that they're emerging across the continent, which they're looking to develop youth skills development and financing and so on. So that's a key part there. But the question about biochar, thank you so much. This is a great question and something that we constantly need to think about. We're thinking about trade-off when we're trying to solve one problem in one side and we create another. And emissions is a very important one. So in the case of biochar, the way we're producing a hive geo, what we're looking at doing, we are producing micro algae to sequester carbon. But indeed, then the production of biochar from that dry mass of microalgae is going to require some energy inputs of production. So I think the key here is to use renewable energy inputs, and it's really important to look at that, because if you use fossil fuels, of course, this is going to be problematic, because on one side, you're sequestering the carbon, you're remediating the ground, so you can sequester carbon, but you're inputting fossil fuels into production. So it's super important to do that. And going back again to about youth as well, if we're looking to regenerate more land, for example, in South Africa, we're going to have more available land for more production. So it will increase also food job opportunities, of course, for youth.
Thank you, Ava, for addressing that question. I'm still taking questions in the chat, and if one pops up for you, I'll come back to you. But perhaps I think before I go back to Simpiwe and to Sipio, I want to go back to Prof. Julian May, because I think this question that came in the chat from Abdul Rashid really is a reflection of part of what he said in his presentation. Prof. May, if maybe you can just come on to respond to this question. His question is, worldwide food security is often forwarded as the key aim of the global food market. Then how does this idea stand for local food markets? He says in the earlier talk, one of the speakers said that South Africa produces enough food, but still people are sleeping hungry. So what's the challenge? Why, if there is enough food, why is it not getting to everybody? Why are we having people sleeping hungry? Prof. May, are you able to come back maybe and perhaps reflect on that question?
Oh, thank you. If you remember, you asked us to hold up a piece of paper about what makes us angry. And yes, you might recall the piece of paper I held up with food inequities, yes, because that lies at the bottom of the explanation. Certainly in South Africa, and I think in many other countries in Africa where we have high and rising inequality, the bottom line is that the people who are poor simply don't have the resources to be able to afford food. And if we're talking about a situation like South Africa, where more than half of our population are now urbanized, that means they don't have the option to be able to grow their own food. even countries where we don't have such high levels of urbanization, those that are trying to produce are still resource constrained, are being impacted negatively by climate change, but are unable to adapt, are unable to absorb the shock. And so that is another reason why even countries where people have land and are able to produce, why they're not able to produce sufficient of the food that they need. In South Africa, the driver of that inequality does come down to our very high levels of unemployment, as well as I mentioned in the presentation, but the existing concentration of ownership of land, of food systems, which means that we don't have the buffer that other countries have in Africa, where we can have more people engaged in production and have more smallholder agriculture. So I guess it makes me angry. It's a solvable problem. We've had the presentation by the colleague who is a farmer. It shows that we have the farmers who able to provide the country with sufficient food. I think in generally, certainly South Africa, and I think many other countries in Africa, we have world-class farmers. Yeah. It's not about the skills of the farmer. We have world-class science. We would be able to do more with that science, but it comes down to questions of affordability and of particularly the affordability of safe, nutritious food. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Maybe whilst I still have you on the line, there was also a question that came around the fisheries and ocean resources that impact on food security. I don't know if you have any thoughts on, how the sort of fisheries and ocean resources can sort of add to our food security needs, or is there almost like a fight between, our sort of food-based resources versus the fisheries and ocean resources? I think that was a question that came through from Mike from Vigela. Any thoughts in that direction?
Well, in South Africa, I think we underexploit certain types of fish, so particularly pelagic fisheries, the pelagic fish. So the smaller oil fish. There was a time where we were actually processing such fish into chicken food. I don't think we're doing that anymore, but there's a resource, a healthy resource there that I think we could make better use of in South Africa. Our fishing stocks are still perilously low, and many fish are either red rated or orange rated, which means that we ought not be consuming that, and we have to find ways of building up our fish stocks. We do face problems of illegal fishing taking place in our waters, and the fish then being exported to other countries in the East and indeed in Europe. South Africans, unlike the rest of the continent, do not have a high consumption of freshwater fish. And I think this is a pity, because in most other countries in Africa, freshwater fish is valued, perhaps because we have no natural lakes that we haven't gone that route. But I'm aware of very well-designed projects that have made use of water reservoirs, even in the Karoo, to be able to produce freshwater fish and can that. So I think there's an underexploited resource there in freshwater resources that we could consider getting into in South Africa.
Yes. Sitting on opportunities there, lots of rooms to explore. And I guess when thinking about Eva, who spoke about, sort of thinking more widely in terms of food systems and where opportunities lie for youth engagement, this idea that you're bringing up right now of looking into maybe production of freshwater fish, that could be an area where we could see young people, if supported, can get into quite strongly. Thank you for that intervention. I know on the line we also have Zaza Letolo, who is a young farmer, and she's just spoken about the fact that she's got land, but she has no resources. And that's probably the struggle of many farmers. And, they have the passion, they are ready to do the work. She wants to do livestock and cropping, but she needs the resources to be supported to be able to do that well. All right, so I am looking at my time and I am almost at 22 the hour, where we are ending at 5 o'clock promptly. So I want to just get back to my panelists. Maybe speaking to Simpiwe, speaking to Spio, and speaking to Azwi. What are the maybe Simpiwe, coming to you? You know, I asked the question about commodities. You know, are there some that are more vulnerable than others, and what is being done to sort of address these challenges from a sort of agriculture marketing point of view, but also looking at the agriculture master plan? If you can speak briefly on that, and then I'll ask Gift to reflect on creating that critical mass of young agripreneurs to be able to ensure that food security, that we are food secure even under a changing climate. And then finally, I want you to, you know, to give it to us straight so that our farmers know what to expect this coming season. So, gentlemen, in that order, we'll start with Simpiwe, and then Spio, and then Azwi.
Thanks, Tembi. So in terms of crops that are mostly affected, I think global figures show that of the top 4 of those, 3 happen to be staple foods. You're looking at maize, for example, rice, and potatoes. And you also have soybean, which is also a very important crop globally. In terms of maize, it is forecast that by 2050, we are likely to see quite a big reduction in terms of maize production due to temperature variations and decreased as well as unreliable rainfall, which will affect the major growing areas such as the US and Brazil. And coming to rice, we also seeing figures that show that yields will globally drop by up to more than 5.5%. If temperatures rise, for example, by 1.5 degrees. So at that rate, we are likely to see that staple food being affected globally. The effects of climate change on soybean are a little bit more mixed because there's a sense that soybean plants respond favorably to higher concentrations of CO2 in the air. And then lastly, potatoes, which is also another big staple, is forecast to decrease. The production is forecast to decrease globally by as much as 9% because of the fact that potatoes need a steady supply of water to grow, and therefore fewer areas will be able to be suitable for potatoes. So those are some of the stats that one is seeing and the forecasts. What can be done? I think there's various speakers have highlighted some of the strategies that need to be implemented. For example, to expand production and adapt new techniques. So that would mean investment in new innovations, and also the shifting of crops to areas that are more suitable. Also growing more resilient and climate appropriate varieties of crops and new kinds of foods altogether. So I think, I mean, it's a whole lot of strategies that are being considered. But I think what is most important, if as a closing remark, and I'm going to also respond to the question around the master plan that has just been signed in South Africa. I think the most important thing to do is to make sure that policy making and implementation, most importantly, is coordinated. And I think the experience we've had with the master plan in South Africa is that there was a very concerted effort in getting private sector and government and other stakeholders to work together and then agree on what needs to be done. But going further than that and saying this is what private sector is committing and this is what government is committing in terms of resources. And also from the government side, there's much more commitment in terms of what are the policies that need to be put in place to make sure that the environment is conducive. In the past, I think the policies that we've really failed to implement because I think there was lack of coordination. Now I think there's much more, I think, appetite and much more commitment to to adopt a more private and public-private partnership approach. For example, there's a focus on what each province can do. Prof. May indicated, for example, if there's an opportunity to move wheat production more from the Western Cape to the Eastern Cape, those two provinces to coordinate their efforts in terms of their resource allocation. And this is what the master plan is allowing to happen through a much more coordinated approach.
Okay. Sounds like we are heading in the right direction. And I think that also already answers some questions that have come through in the chat. We had a question around sophisticated policies, and how do we make them work? And one way I'm hearing you answering is the issue of coordination and making sure that all the players are on the table when it's conceptualized and also agree with the implementation plan, which is, the case that you've given of the master plan. I think I am really looking at our time. We're getting a lot of comments in the chat. I'm going to process them, but I want to give Spio now an opportunity to just reflect on, the need, how do we create a critical mass of agropreneurs? Because we want farmers, but we don't just want, your sort of traditional run-of-the-mill farmers that are going to use the hand hoe and take us back ages. But we want farmers that are going to be on apps, that are going to be, really up to date with technologies and innovations. So your thoughts, Spio?
Thank you. I'll try to be short. The many challenges have been outlined, and one of them goes beyond production, but accessibility of food. So I want to just encourage young farmers out there to say, it's not just about farming, it is also getting into food business, understanding the value chain, understanding the different markets, be it formal markets or informal markets. In South Africa, there is a big part of food that is sold in the informal market. Dr. Ngangwane pointed out some of the crops, be it onions, which are used almost by each and every household in the country, be it a rich household or a poor household. Potatoes, they are used in various forms. Tomatoes are used in many forms, and cabbages and all those. Those products are one of the leading sellers in any fresh produce market in South Africa. And guess who is consuming them? It's township market, which is a black market in South Africa. And most people who distribute those products, it's street vendors. So obviously there's an opportunity there. So it's not just about farming, but it is also about looking at opportunities within the food value chain. Where can I fit in? And not just look at farming. Surely we've got enough land that is still lying fallow and it's productive land. I want to encourage young farmers how this can be done. Their contribution should just be willing to start. That's number one. Government would then have to develop land reform policies that are supportive of young farmers, and not ask young farmers a leg and an arm of requirements to access a piece of land. Land will always be there, and government can have ways to control the use and ownership of land so that it can be, for example, tradable amongst young farmers, so that if one young farmer is irresponsible in terms of using land, there is a way that they can lose that land to be transferred to the next young farmer. The last point that I want to make is I've not seen innovation in South Africa in terms of incentivizing young farmers. If you look at, we come from a traditional commercial farming era, where in South Africa, large hectares of land most food is produced from large hectares of land by fewer individuals. So how do we then ensure that there is a critical mass of young farmers that can produce even in the smallest possible land. We need policies that would incentivize innovation. I'll make an example. We actually need an idols show for young farmers. We need South Africa have talent amongst young farmer show, which will attract young farmers with innovations. One young farmer or person may have an innovative idea that he will never live to implement, but someone else may learn from that. So innovation is also critical. Thank you.
Thank you, Spio. Actually, let me just cut you there so that I throw it to Azwi quickly. We are exactly left with 9 minutes, and I just want to give Azwi the chance to tell us what's ahead for this season and what our farmers should expect, so that Spio doesn't have to worry about extending his growing season and the like. What's in store?
Okay, let me quickly do a weather forecast. This is what I normally do. So here we are looking at a map of expected rainfall for the month of November, December going to January. This is mostly our summer season. Our weather currently is being affected again by La Nina. This is the same thing that was sitting last year. So we are expecting rainfall that is above normal, meaning that we are going to get more rainfall than we normally get. But there is a small catch. We need to continuously check our daily weather forecast to know when it is going to rain. And so far, this can still be updated. But as we still have the La Nina, we all know that this brings lots and lots of rainfall for South Africa. Hence, we are expecting above normal. So it does look good for farmers, mainly with crops that require fair amounts of rainfall. It looks like we are going to get enough rainfall this year. And again, the farmers, if they can capture as much water as they can, because what we have seen with the footprint of climate change, the rainy season and the winter season, they came to get shorter and shorter. So they may need some dam or to store water just to put them through the last stands of that crop.
Okay. Thanks. Perfect. It's looking good for farmers so far. Thank you so much, Azwi. I would like to thank my panelists for really getting to the meat of things. I want to thank Eva Morales. I would like to thank Dr. Simpiwe Maweni. I would like to thank Spio Mafulega. And I would like to thank Azwi Tuwani for that weather report and that focus that is looking positive for the farmers. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our conference. I'm sure you will agree with me that this could have gone on and on and on because the discussions were really rich. And I certainly learned a few things and certainly have a few things to digest, and I hope it's the same with you. Thank you so much for your comments that came in through the chat. We did not ignore them. We saw the comments from Matthews Ngoza, from Tovela, from Tamsin, from Simba, from Fiona, from Stuart. We saw all the comments that came through. Suilanji, Zaza, Raymond, we saw all of them and we really appreciate them, and they're going to be part of the proceedings of this meeting. So I want to thank you for all the contributions. And as we close, I would like to hand over to Mike Brosnan from Vigela, who is the founder of Vigela, to just thank our participants and speakers and give us a charge as we close our celebrations on World Food Day. Mike, over to you.
Okay, Eva, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. You know, we talk about doom and gloom. What I've seen here today is only hope and scope. You know, and I'd be remiss if I don't refer to Sipiwe. Sipiwe, you're an example to the younger generation. You're the benchmark of what our economy needs. As a farmer, I'm left in awe of you. Keep on the good work. You know, we sometimes, and I brought up the question of our oceans and so forth, and we forget about the oceans. I mean, The ocean is our largest carbon sink. It's our biggest ecosystem. So much potential rests within our oceans. But as Eva Morales mentioned earlier, you know, our lands are no longer arable. The technology that she spoke about is immense. And we are facing the same thing in our oceans. There's a term that I only heard about recently from one of our marine biologists. It's called hypoxia. And hypoxia is ocean dead zones. So there are zones in our oceans that can't sustain resource anymore. So we've got to look at that. I mean, it will add to food security, but that's a subject for another day. So I'm just here to say I'm in awe of all of you. Thank you sincerely. I've got to make special mention of a very special lady, the founder and CEO of No Line Communication, Nozi, who in my eyes enabled a really marvelous presentation. Virginia Simpson, also on the Vikela team, Stuart Smith, the two chairs, Tembi, who's also a colleague of mine, serves on the advisory board of Vikela. We're very proud of you, Tembi. Keep up the good work. Chalitsi, I don't know if you're still here. You did a marvelous job. Franapan, SABC, without your voice, the message won't get out there. FAO, Dr. Mercy, very, very informative, and I was blown away. And Eva, I believe there's a great future for the technology that you hold there. I do believe renewables in producing biochar is the way to go. I do believe the platforms are available. If I've missed anyone, it's not intentional. I also thank all those of you that tuned in are still here. It was an immense day, and let's do it again. And thank you. Keep up the good work.